Maritime law has been variously described and defined in ways that reflect the subjective perception as well as semantics. One view is that maritime law provides the legal framework for maritime transport, and another is that maritime law comprises of a body of legal rules and concepts concerning the business of carrying goods and passengers by water. Maritime law is a body of legal principles which govern, in particular, marine commerce and navigation, business transacted at sea or relating to navigation, ships and shipping, seamen, and the transportation of persons and property. Important sector development issues such as this will be brought to the front burner on Maritime Radar. I am Nneoma Obi-Asualo. Maritime transport is essential to the proper operation of any country's economy and a vital part of a nation's transport infrastructure. Without maritime transport, Africa would have been landlocked and its economy stagnant. Its importance to Africa's economy is in transportation, facilitation of trade and commerce, revenue generation, job creation, defense, security, and many more. Therefore, good laws are a necessary precondition for the development of the maritime industry, but they will only be effective if there is also the political will to enforce these laws and the practical capacity among government, relevant agencies, and stakeholders to carry them out. In this episode, our focus will be the impact of enforcing these laws on Africa's economy, as maritime laws must be implemented to ensure industry development. But first, let's take a look at the issues and developments that made news in the sector. Stay with us.
The Director General of the Nigerian Administration and Safety Agency (NIMASA), Bashir Jamo, says the government has shortlisted 11 banks to disburse 350 million Cabotage Vessel Financing Fund, or CVFF. Jamo, who spoke during a press briefing, added that the Minister of Transportation, Maritime Sambo, will inaugurate a committee by next week for the purpose of disbursing the fund. The CVFF is derived from the 2% contribution by indigenous ship owners for every contract executed in the Nigerian waters. The disbursement of the CVFF is backed by the provision of the Cabotage Act 2003, which aims to promote the development of indigenous ship acquisition capacity by providing financial assistance to Nigerian operators in domestic coastal shipping.
It has been on the drawing board from the days of the first.
The Minister of Transportation, Maritime Sambo, has reiterated Nigeria's commitment to take a lead among African countries in harnessing the abundant resources of the blue economy for the country's benefit. Sambo disclosed this during a courtesy visit from the Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority, ISA, Michael Lodge, in Abuja. The minister noted that it's been challenges out of 12 exploration projects in developing countries around the world, none is African. He acknowledged that the resources in the sea far outweigh those on land, and Nigeria is lucky to have an organization like ISA to help it explore and exploit its untapped blue economy. Nigeria has recorded 0 sea robbery and piracy attacks in its waterways since the last quarter of 2021. The Director General of the Nigerian Maritime and Safety Agency (NIMASA), Dr. Bashir Jamo, disclosed this at a ministerial briefing in Abuja. Jamo said it was possible due to the deployment of an integrated national security and waterways protection infrastructure in Nigeria, codenamed Deep Blue Project and powered by NIMASA.
First quarter to date, we have never recorded one single accident or incident in our own territorial waters in terms of piracy attack.
The Deep Blue Project, which was inaugurated by President Muhammadu Buhari in 2021, is to ensure that the Nigerian waters and those of the Gulf of Guinea are safe and secure. South African major port and terminal operators Transnet has declared a force majeure at its ports over a strike by workers. The United National Transport Union and South African Transport and Allied Workers Union has rejected a 3% wage raise offered by Transnet, saying it is below South Africa's inflation rate of 7.5%. Transnet has doubled its offer to 3% in an attempt to avoid strike action. The two unions, which represent most of South African port workers, started the strike on Thursday, and SATAWU members are expected to walk out on Monday. Some industry observers say the strike is illegal and is expected to have a major impact on South Africa's economy. South Africa is the latest country to see strike by port workers over pay. Norway says it will impose limits on Russia's fishing vessels using its ports. This is to further tighten its security following last week's suspected sabotage on the Nord Stream gas pipeline in the nearby Baltic Sea. Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt addressed a news conference saying that Russian trawlers would only be allowed to visit 3 of several dozen ports along Norway's coast. They must also undergo security checks. She stopped short of imposing a total ban on Russian vessels as demanded by security experts, but noted that some access was needed as the joint management of fish stocks remained important. Russian fishing vessels often deliver their catch to Norwegian ports, which has benefited Norway.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
If you are just joining us, this is Maritime Radar. There are several laws that should aid maritime development. The challenge has been implementation. I spoke to Dr. Emeka Akabogu, a maritime law and policy expert, on how implementing maritime laws can help develop Africa's maritime sector. Stay with us. You're welcome to Maritime Radar. The maritime law provides a legal framework for maritime transport. That definition is not exhaustive. How will you define maritime law?
It's actually exhaustive, because the only thing that it may not be exhaustive is the framework, because the framework of any legal framework is almost infinite relative to the potential number of scenarios that may arise. But primarily, maritime law is a framework for maritime transportation. So in Nigeria, for instance, that framework is defined by the key legislation which govern shipping, the Merchant Shipping Act, a range of them actually, because it depends on what area of shipping you're concerned with. There's commercial shipping, there's shipping development and promotion, there's safety, there's regulatory compliance, quite a range of them. So it depends on what area. So there's a range of laws which govern different areas, because shipping is not just is international, and at the same time it is also it's also promotional, by which I mean it works towards promoting the development of the local economy. So, you know, if you put all these things together, you see that you're dealing with quite a range of diverse and almost infinite
definitions.
Yes.
So what
Precisely.
exactly is our challenge? Is it enacting these laws or implementation?
We do have quite a number of laws which are good by all standards, and the challenge has always been implementation. And I think I find that it's something which across the continent, many governments grapple with. Implementation of existing legal legislation, the rule of law, commitment to the rule of law, and, ensuring an orderly framework on a going basis is a challenge which exists across the continent.
So how do we ensure this implementation, since you have identified as the issue that we have?
I mean, it's really about, a lot of time is about the will of the government, it's about political will, because implementation is essentially do what the law says. Let there be no sacred cows. Justice is blind. The scales are even. And essentially, it's important that that illustration should be lived. So that's how to ensure it's implemented. Avoid discretion and ensure that what is right is done at all times. So political will.
So why is it that our stakeholders do not explore this judicial process for their claims? Do you think our maritime laws are competitive?
The laws are competitive. If we're talking about claims, for instance, so maybe you are referring to claims which cargo owners, for instance,
yes.
Or even ship owners may be entitled to, and they let
because
these
there's this
claims.
debate that the ports are congested or they are not congested. So what will you say? Are they congested?
The ports are congested literally, but the ports ought not be congested.
Is it because of these claims?
Not just the claims. You need to have everyone abiding by the rule of law. Now, and that's so, it's not just the government that is subject to the rule of law. Even citizens, even potential claimants, importers, exporters. So the reason the ports are congested is simply because many times the rules relating to clearance are not followed. So you find people who want to use a port as a warehouse, or you find people who have not paid adequate duties, and as a result, cargo which ought to have left the port is being detained. Then of course, you find people who are ready to obey the laws, but the rule of law still is not followed by those who are supposed to implement it, whether they be customs service or they be any of the other regulatory agencies. Customs particularly is, wanting in that regard. So you need to ensure that the law, what the law says, is implemented. A typical example now is the customs. Most times you see that the goods are delayed because customs comes up with arbitrary charges. And it's illegal to impose arbitrary charges. However, you need the will to clearly articulate what should be a charge and be consistent with that, and ensure that people know that. Even before importation, everybody knows what is coming, what the cost of clearing is going to be.
So what will be your advice?
As a lawyer, and really as a reasonable person, is to implement the law. I mean, it sounds very simple and simplistic, but really that's the way to go. What happens is that most times, implementing the law is not convenient for those who have ulterior motives. So, for those who prefer to exercise discretion, implementing the law is not always convenient. So the gray areas are preferred, and once you have gray areas and the excess of discretion, arbitrariness, you find that it conflates the entire process, leads to a lot of confusion and delays, which we're concerned with in this instance.
So looking at the economy, how does these laws affect the African economy?
It's quite diverse. It's diverse. So we can only speak to this from very particular perspectives. So I'll probably try to answer that question from the point of view of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, for instance. So you have this new regime for the continent, which potentially could boost a lot of intra-continental trade. However, you need to have the legal framework for it clearly established in all the countries. Nigeria is signatory to it. Most other countries on the continent are signatory to it. But individually, all the countries need to, as a first measure, domesticate the key requirements of that agreement into their domestic laws. They need to ensure that their domestic laws reflect the spirit and the letter of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. That way, that value that could potentially flow from the agreement can be seen. So right now, there's still a lot of talk around it, but you don't see, across the continent, you don't really see any significant push towards achieving it. And that's probably going to be a problem we're going to notice going forward.
You know, achieving a 24 hours cargo clearance will also drive the economy. Do you think this is achievable in Africa?
It is achievable. It is achievable. You see, it's about commitment. You know, I mean, I can't really say it enough. You need to implement laws as they exist. 24 hours cargo clearance, if you're committed to it, you will make it happen. But then to make it happen, you'll see that you've got, from a political point of view, you've got to engage a range of industry stakeholders. So you're not just dealing with a terminal operator, for instance. You're dealing with a terminal that has to be open, that needs to have electricity supply 24 hours. You're dealing with shipping lines that have to be ready to have their ships alongside on time. You're dealing with customs service that needs to be ready to inspect cargo as it comes out of the port. Immediately it's been offloaded, stacked in the relevant areas and being positioned for the inspections. You need to have importers who are ready and willing to have their trucks come alongside. I mean, so you see, it's a network of activities, a network of responsibilities, which all need to work together, because it's really, that chain is really as strong as its weakest link. So if one link is not effective, it undermines every other thing. So if the government is fully switched on, and there are obligations, there are responsibilities, and there are consequences for failure to meet whatever targets are being set, then that can be achieved. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is that you don't have this uniformity of priority. You don't have that kind of commitment, and at the end of the day, it's
do you also think the unified laws for Africa is also part of the problem?
Well, for instance, you have the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So that is something significant.
How has that fared?
So that's the point. So it's relatively new. It's a 2020 agreement. But the point is, and which is a point I made earlier, is that individually each country needs to make that effort to domesticate the provisions of this law. Okay, and that's working towards our uniformity. So we don't have uniform laws across the continent. It is a challenge. It is a challenge because, you know, every single country on the continent is the same problem with moving from one country to another. So it's easier to move within Europe than to move within Africa. It's easier for Africans to trade with the other continents than to trade internally. So it may be useful at some point in time to try and achieve a significant uniformity as far as the key transport elements are concerned. We need to have regional lines moving. We need to have a situation where you have regional cabotage, for instance. Many countries have individual cabotage regimes which will constrain trade, but these regimes can operate side by side with the regional framework for that. So there's a lot of a lot more sophistication and detail needs to go into policy making for the continent and even for individual countries.
Oh, quickly looking at the World Day Maritime theme for this year, new technologies for greener shipping. What are the conversations going around it for Africa? Or what conversation should we be having as Africa around it?
Well, you know, new technologies are great, and they really should serve for increased efficiency. I've noticed, this is without prejudice to my own opinions, but I've noticed that some conversations have tended to dwell on the targets which are imposed on African countries, or on countries around the world really, with regards to emissions and the like. And
but do you think we are going to meet this 2050 goal? Do you think Africa is ready? Can we meet this goal?
If we are committed to, we can.
Okay.
But if it works for us,
do you think we started a conversation?
I have heard conversations, but are those committed conversations? That's another question. Is there a total engagement even with the concept, for instance? I mean, some governments have come out to say that the entire concept of climate change and the obligations following it are not in the best interest of the continent. There have been such arguments where it has been said that Africa emits barely 2% of global emissions, but is required to meet very tough requirements which are expensive and which are not consistent with the economic realities on the continent. So you've got valid arguments coming from countries on the continent. So at the end of the day, the leaders on the continent need to agree on what is best for the continent within the context of current realities and optimizing value globally.
Looking at our unified laws, individual countries must come together to ensure implementation. These are the words of Dr. Emeka Akabogu. He is a maritime and policy expert. Many thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Africa needs its own storytellers, people who understand the continent because they're from it. People who know that news is more than just a conversation starter, it's our stories. Because these stories run deeper than headlines and segments. It's about digging deeper to get the facts and telling the human side of every single story, not just the echoes from foreign headlines and perspectives. It's time to take back our narratives and share them in our voices. The birth of Africa's New Age reporting, and this is where it begins, right here at News Central TV, with stories that put Africa first.
This is Africa. I bet you've heard a lot about it, but this is what you need to know. It's the home of the youngest and fastest growing population in the world. This, my friend, is opportunity right here. This is the future, and everyone wants Africa's attention. You need a voice that's African, young, conversational, a platform with the potential to reach millions of people across the continent with content they can relate to, such as lifestyle shows, sports and news, just the way they love it. Imagine all the people you could be talking to on News Central TV. Well, don't just think about it. Contact us for sponsorship and advert bookings. Put your brand where Africa is watching. It's News Central TV.
And this is where we draw the curtain on this week's edition. Every week, join us on Maritime Radar as we explore how Africa can unlock the potentials in the maritime sector and its connected industries. You can also expect the latest in maritime news and industry insights right here. I am Nneoma Obi-Asualo. Until I come your way again, it's goodbye, Africa.